came to this work. Actually, I was compelled by circumstances of my life to face this system of capital punishment. Those experiences have since become an integral part of my personal history, and that and the choices I have made on how to adapt to this harsh reality that I've experienced has determined who I am and how I choose to live. I have a sister living on death row in California. It has been 18 years since she was convicted, a nightmare that changed both our lives forever. But it has also evolved into many privileged experiences that beg to be shared. And it's not an easy task to translate our horror story side by side with the deepest love and hopefulness. Our spiritual growth has painfully developed a great deal over the last 2 decades. Finally, a few years ago, I decided to write about her trial and speak out to educate the public. I want people to know how much I love my sister and to see her and the others on the rows in the United States as human beings. My adult children decided to work with me in support directly, and so our relationships have also deepened and our bonds strengthened because of this sentence on my sister. My input on this subject comes from first-hand experience, years of work on my sister's case, and much research. I'm going to read some beautiful words of Khalil Gibran from his work, The Prophet. Oftentimes, I have heard you speak of one who commits a wrong as though he were not one of you, but a stranger unto you, and an intruder upon your world. But I say that even as the holy and the righteous cannot rise beyond the highest which is in each of you, so the wicked and the weak cannot fall lower than the lowest, which is in you also. And as a single leaf turns not yellow, but with the silent knowledge of the whole tree, so the wrongdoer cannot do wrong without the hidden will of you all. And you who would understand justice, how shall you, unless you look upon all deeds in fullness of light? Only then shall you know that the erect and the fallen are but one man, standing in twilight between the night of his pygmy self and the day of his God self, and that the cornerstone of the temple is not higher than the lowest stone in its foundation. That really encompasses the issue tonight in my mind.
But first, I'd like to briefly explain what tonight's event, Honoring Life, an Interfaith panel on the death penalty, is about, and finish my opening remarks by briefly explaining something of its format. Earlier this year, House Bill 1504 and Senate Bill SB 5372 were introduced to the Washington state lawmakers. If they should become law, they would eliminate the death penalty in our state. The bills will make it through their judicial committees and be put to the voters as soon as possible, and should this happen, it's sure to stir up a lot of dialogue about this divisive issue. Tonight we're going to begin discussing capital punishment from an interfaith perspective in the hope of learning how different religious traditions regard the matter. It's important to remember that this is only the beginning of what is likely to be a long, intense conversation, and not all faiths, and certainly not every perspective is represented here tonight. We hope that the circle will widen and our understanding might broaden as the conversation continues during the months ahead. Supporters of the bills argue capital punishment ought to be abolished for a variety of reasons. On a practical level, they say it's not an effective deterrent, nor an efficient use of public funds. According to a 2011 report, for instance, our state spends an average of $1.2 million on death penalty cases compared to an average of only $89,000 on cases involving life without parole. They also argue that capital punishment is unjust because it executes innocent people, is institutionally racist, and because killing people for whatever reason is morally reprehensible. For instance, that since 1973, more than 140 death row inmates have been exonerated. No telling how many innocents have been executed. In addition, More than half of all executions in this country since 1976 have been non-whites. Blacks in particular, who represent only 12 to 13% of the overall population, make up more than 40% of those sentenced to death. More about these arguments against capital punishment, I'd like to conclude my opening remarks with a story that is probably familiar to most of us and is central to the Abrahamic religions, certainly Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and Baha'i. It's the story of Cain, who murdered his brother Abel. As soon as the act was complete, Cain felt the enormity and the finality of his own explosive violence. "I am unworthy to live," he said. "I am not fit to exist on this earth." Cain himself argued that he should be put to death for what he'd done. And yet the Hebrew God said, "You shall not die." And Cain went on to become a city builder, a father of artists in metal and musical instruments. It raises the religious question: where is the possibility of redemption in something as final as capital punishment? Our panelists will touch upon this question and other questions in just a moment, but first I'd like to remind you that this dialogue is a dialogue, and as contentious as the issue might be for some, genuine dialogue demands that we listen and respect each other.